very much, Glenda. Thank you very much to all of you for coming here. To get myself in the mood on my iPod today, I started listening to Bamboo. Now, Filipino is not that good, but I get the gist of what he's saying. I thought it would be, it reminds me, that kind of rock music reminds me of the days I used to spend in this area listening to rock bands at a place that's shut down now, I think No Rigs. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember that place. I get a sense actually about who I am talking to. How many of you are students? How many of you are actually students? Can you put your hands up for me, please? Thank you, all, the overwhelming majority. How many of you practicing journalists? Wow! And how many of you are on social media? And how many of you think that Philippine society could change for the better? Give yourself a round of applause. You know, I'm only going to speak for half an hour. You'll get a chance to ask your questions a little later in the day in the open forum. But what I wanted to do today was just talk a bit about my experiences, so that, which I think, and the things that I'll be talking about today are coinciding right now, to create a time of unprecedented connectivity, transparency, and volatility. I want to build a picture for you. Is that the right one? There we are. I want to build a picture for you. Thank you. Of the environment within which journalists, bloggers, and citizens are now operating, and in which you might give you added dimensions within which you consider your activities, careers, even business, and your hopes to change society for the better. All right, first of all, I'm going to talk about my experiences, a little bit about Al Jazeera initially, what we're trying to achieve, because a lot of people get the wrong idea about it, because of some really wrong impressions that were made during the previous administration, of George Bush. I want to talk about technology and trust, about the WikiLeaks era, the Arab uprising as an example of social media playing a role in social change, and also on the impact on the practice of journalism in 2012. Here's where I started my journalism career. 1992, the ABS-TVN newsroom. There might be a few faces you recognize in there, but this was pretty much everyone in the ABS-TVN newsroom right after The World Tonight would go out at 10:30 p.m. I was a beat reporter, and I learned my Tagalog from night duty, hanging outside Western Police District, as it was known, in Cubao, and everyone would tease me because of my English accent. I don't know if all of you are aware, but I have this accent, even though I'm a proud Filipino, because I grew up in London, because my mother was exiled, she was a journalist too. So we couldn't come back during the Marcos era, and it's one reason why I personally know that about the power of the word to pressure authoritarian regimes. But the skills and values that I began to learn as a journalist here in the Philippines hold strong and true for me today, no matter what technology comes in, no matter what kind of challenges that I'm faced with. After a while, I moved to CNN International. 10 years there, I started as an assistant producer, then a writer, then a producer, and finally an anchor in Atlanta, Georgia, and then in Hong Kong. In between Atlanta and Hong Kong, I was with the BBC in London, but I didn't have any pictures of that. There's someone you might recognize in this picture coming up. They let me off the set a couple of times, this time with this other person, Maria Ressa. It's the night East Timor became a nation, and it was an incredibly busy night, and week, in fact. I'll never forget the energy with which we all attacked that story, but it was one, I think, that was very meaningful to us as Filipinos, because it was the birth of a new society, of hopes of self-determination. Now, Al Jazeera English. Am I pointing this in the right direction? Yes, okay. I joined this team that launched Al Jazeera in 2005. This is before social media flattened the information environment. But the idea even then was to reverse the information flow. Instead of going north to south or west to east, we would bring it from east to west, from south to north, to tell the people in the developed world what was really going on in the developing world, not through the prism of Western correspondents parachuted into the areas that we live in. This was in recognition, of course, of the shifting centres of power in this world, and also to get away from treating news stories in a formulaic way. On launch day, I remember watching CNN and BBC going out at the same time that we were going out on the bank of television monitors that was available to us at the time. And CNN was showing a Senate inquiry into the Iraq War. The BBC was showing the opening of the Houses of Parliament by the Queen. She was wearing a crown and a cape and carrying scepters and things. And on Al Jazeera, we were live from a refugee camp in Darfur. None of these were wrong stories, but what they did was mirror what our agendas are about, what we think our worlds are about, what we think is important. What Jazeera wanted to do was to bear witness and do something different, put people at the center of the news agenda. Because what has gone wrong? The former Director General of the Al Jazeera Network put it this way, that media has transformed into a center of power and influence. And that transformation means that instead of remaining a means of checking the activities of the centers of power and influence, that has changed the nature of the media role. Centers of power and influence are erratic by nature. They act to serve their own interests, and they do so not in accordance with a fixed set of professional rules. Pursuing changing interests has been at the expense of people's confidence in the media, which is often in partnership with the centers of power, promoting what they stand for and proving to be too associated with their objectives, priorities, and slogans. You can see where the feisty attitude of Al Jazeera came from, standing up to the authoritarian Arabic regimes as they did in the mid-90s. What we wanted to do was provide what Wadah called the journalism of depth. That is one that considers the people to be the center of its editorial policy. It seeks to give the masses a voice and a platform. It should be courageous and be prepared to withstand so much pressure by disaffected centers of power. The moment it maintains its position and insists on its policy, the people will rally around it. Then and only then, the people will restore confidence in the media and offer it their support, appreciation, and respect. This was one of the promotions that we let out when we launched.
We are happy because we saw Al Jazeera and we see African news.
It takes as many different points of view as possible.
It's all about perspective. Al Jazeera is a fresh perspective, showing every angle, every side. We tell it like it is.
You hear gunfire going off now. Excitement is rising. It's pretty clear to me that large areas of this district are in the control of the Taliban.
The situation is nowhere near under control. It's relatively quiet, but now and again there can be some tense moments.
With broadcast centres in Doha, Kuala Lumpur, London and Washington DC, Al Jazeera reaches right around the world with 24-hour news, current affairs and the very best of programming. Al Jazeera, setting the news agenda.
I want to move on to another aspect of the information environment facing us today,
I have stolen unashamedly from Ogilvy and a presentation given by an amazing guy called Andrew Thomas, who is actually married to a Filipina. He shows this graph to talk about how Asians in particular trust social media more than traditional media. And when he talks about social media, he really means the pre-technology kind, pre-internet, the kind where you talk to your friends, you talk to your family about what they think about something. And there is, as you can see from this graph, evidence that Asians in particular have always trusted social networks more than centers of money, power, or authority. Can you all see it? Okay. Another graph that he shows is this pyramid. This is to show that there has been a tectonic shift in trust by the public. Whereas before, in the age of deference, people would trust leaders the most, trust state media the most, trust corporations the most. They're at the top of the pyramid, right? They must be trustworthy. And the man on the street, how can we believe him? What does he know? That's shifted completely. And we're now in an age of reference, in which the man on the street's opinion is trusted and believed more than the leader. The leaders, people think, are lying to them, or they've got an agenda. There's a reason why they're saying things the way that they say them. Deference, instead of deferring to your leaders, the people in power, the people who have money, instead, people are saying, okay, you say that's the case, you say that's what's happening, but I, using my social networks, using the internet, I'm going to look around, thank you very much, and see what other people are saying is going on. Because I don't necessarily believe you. Much as I hate to quote Rupert Murdoch, here he is. To find something comparable to what's going on today, you have to go back 500 years to the printing press, the birth of mass media, which incidentally is what really destroyed the old world of kings and aristocracies. Technology is shifting power away from the editors, the publishers, the establishment, the media elite. Now it's the people who are taking control. Some facts and figures and a fun cartoon for you to consider. Hey, Dad, did you hear the news? No, I haven't seen CNN yet today. What's CNN? In the last 10 to 12 years, 1.5 billion people have started using the internet. They've started doing something that they had never done before. As of a few months ago, 1 billion people have visited Google Earth, for example. 10 years ago, it was just an idea. The progress from idea to revolution has gone at a tremendous pace. There are 500,000 new messages a minute on FB. 1 billion emails and instant messages are sent every day. Social media has apparently even overtaken porn as the #1 activity on the web. Apparently 1 in 5 couples meet online, 3 in 5 gay couples meet online. 1 in 5 divorces are blamed on Facebook. If Facebook were a country, it would be the world's 3rd largest and twice the size of the US population. We are journalists at a time when information is popular. People are connected and they want to talk. People have information and they want to share it. We're at a time when people can create something that's information-oriented and share with many people, even if you cannot leave the place where you are. Now, even though those numbers sound pretty fantastic, that means that only about 22%, or 1 in 5 people in the world, have access to the internet. Many people say they're not worried about it. It's not their concern because, they're worried about feeding their family, keeping a roof over their head. But it can be a part of their solution. Now, another aspect of what's going on at the moment. We have also entered an era of radical transparency or accountability, as one of the founders of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, who I'm sure you recognize, puts it. Radical transparency has an enormous impact on our lives. We can no longer share thoughts, quips, photos, or personal opinions anywhere on the web without being mindful that they may turn up where we least expect. And the challenges for CEOs in business or officials in government are equally tough. Consumers are now in direct contact with government or business, and through Facebook and Twitter they can heap their scorn or praise on their brands or schemes, and they will. I've done it myself. The other day on Twitter, it was Teachers' Day, World Teachers' Day, I think, and the poor Philippine government Twitter account, whoever runs it, sent out a little thing saying, "Happy Teachers' Day." And I sent one back saying, "If you really care, fix the education system." Those kind of platitudes won't do anymore. People will stand up and say what they think. And they'll challenge. Now, corporate greed on Wall Street, misleading justifications for war, leave consumers who are also voters deeply distrustful. Back to WikiLeaks now, and their revelations and cyber attack sensations have shown the dramatic ability of the internet to force the issue. In one leaked diplomatic cable, for example, the damning opinion of US diplomats on the former regime in Tunisia caused fury in that country. It said on the power of the president's family, whether it's cash, services, land, property, or yes, even your yacht, President Ben Ali's family is rumored to covet it and reportedly get what it wants. Seemingly half of the Tunisian business community can claim a Ben Ali connection through marriage. Ben Ali's nephews are reported to have stolen the yacht of a well-connected French businessman. And presciently, a warning. Although the petty corruption rankles, the cable said, it is the excesses of President Ben Ali's family that inspire outrage among Tunisians. With Tunisians facing rising inflation and high unemployment, the conspicuous displays of wealth and persistent rumors of corruption have added fuel to the fire. Not long afterwards, Tunisia erupted in an uprising. Unemployment and inflation were the underlying causes of the revolution, but WikiLeaks may have fueled the fire. Mohamed Bouazizi may not even have had access to the internet or read the WikiLeaks cable. He was 10 years old when he became the main provider for his family, selling produce in the local market. He didn't graduate from high school. His father died when he was 3. His stepfather wasn't well enough to get a regular job. So he had to work. He paid for his sister to go to university. He tried to apply to join the army, but he got turned down, as he did in other jobs. He had no alternative but to continue in the market. Every account says that he was honest and hardworking, wheeling produce by trolley every day for 2 kilometers. And also nearly every day he was humiliated and bullied by police officers since he was a child. Mostly it was a type of petty bureaucratic tyranny that many in the Middle East region know too well, and I think people in this region know as well. Police would confiscate his scales and his produce or fine him for running a stall without a permit. 6 months before his attempted suicide, police sent a fine for 400 dinars or $280 to his house. That's the equivalent of 2 months' earnings. It finally became too much for the young man on December the 17th. That morning it became physical. A policewoman confronted him on the way to market. She returned to take his scales from him, but Bouazizi refused to hand them over. They swore at each other. The policewoman slapped him and with the help of her colleagues forced him to the ground. The officers took away his produce and his scale. Publicly humiliated, Bouazizi tried to seek recourse. He went to the local municipality building, City Hall, and demanded a meeting with an official. He was told it would not be possible and that the official was in a meeting. It's the type of line we're used to hearing, his friend said. So with no official willing to hear his grievances, the young man brought paint fuel, returned to the street outside the building, and set himself on fire. Mohammed's mother says that her son's suicide was motivated not by poverty, but because he had been humiliated. It got to him deep inside. It hurt his pride, she said, referring to the police harassment of her son. And so protesters took to the streets with a rock in one hand, a cell phone in the other. Mohamed Bouazizi was not the first Tunisian to set himself alight in an act of public protest. Neither was it evident that the protest that began in his town, Sidi Bouzid, would spread to other towns. So what was the difference? It was that locals fought to get news of what was happening out and succeeded. On December the 17th, a cousin of Mohammed posted a video of a peaceful protest led by the young men's mother outside the municipality building. That evening, the video was aired on Al Jazeera's Mubasher channel. Al Jazeera's new media team, which trawls the web looking for video from across the Arab world, had picked up the footage via Facebook. Of course, Tunisian media, state-run, in contrast, ignored the growing uprising until December the 29th, the full 12 days after it happened. Now, only a small group of hardcore activists dared share news of the protests online until mid-January, but Tunisia's 3.6 million internet users, that's a third of the population, one of the highest penetration rates on the African continent, were able to follow news of the uprising on social media thanks to a solid core of activists. Throughout the uprising, Tunisian protests relied on Facebook to communicate with each other. Facebook, unlike most video sharing sites, was not included in Tunisia's online censorship. Non-internet users kept abreast of the protests via satellite news channels, including Al Jazeera, France 24, and Al Arabiya. Now, it's interesting to hear people in the village say that no opposition party, to the extent that independent parties existed under Ben Ali's rule, was involved in coordinating the early protests or even in offering moral support. Dafar Salih, a local lawyer who witnessed Mohamed Bouazizi's act of self-immolation, said he asked the head of police to meet with the young man's family that day to try to diffuse the anger on the street. He says he told the police that if you don't get the Bouazizi family in, the country will be burned. He refused by arrogance and ignorance. That lawyer, frustrated by the lack of accountability of officials, became an active participant in the protests. He used Facebook to organize protests, sending out invites to his friends. He was one of the web activists targeted by the Tunisian authorities in the phishing operation. They managed to hijack his Facebook account, but of course, as all of us know, Salhi simply created a new account, because that's what you do. The major driving force behind the protesters was though, a union, a workers' union, which is very strong. Afi Fethi, who teaches physics at the local high school, said it was when police killed protesters in nearby towns that the regional protest became a nationwide uprising. And he said that the person who helped this revolt the most is Ben Ali himself, the president. Why didn't he make the police use rubber bullets? The same fury was ignited in Egypt and forced Mubarak from power after decades of authoritarian rule. To Syria, more than 5,000 people have already been killed in 10 months of demonstrations, according to local groups. They also say that 20% of the nation's population, that's 1 in 5, are said to be behind bars. A video widely shared online shows a young man talking to an older man, numbering the reasons why he might be afraid and encouraging him not to be. It ends with the sentence, "Your silence is their most powerful weapon." Protesters have various ways of explaining why they dare risk injuries like this or even death. For freedom, they say, for employment. summing up the combination of poverty and humiliation that many people in that Tunisian village of Mohamed Bouazizi say pushed them to rise up in protest. One man put it this way: every day I ask my father to give me 1 dinar, that's about 70 cents, and I'm 30 years old. In Libya a few months ago and in Syria now, armed movements began to take up the struggle. These are not just peaceful uprisings. These civil conflicts have an economy of their own, and the international community gets involved. If there's one song that's become the anthem of the Syrian revolution, it's Yalla Irhal Ya Bashar. It's time to leave Bashar. And it was popularized by a singer from the town of Hama, Ibrahim Kashush. On July the 5th, Kashush was found dead with his vocal cords ripped off as a revenge for ridiculing Bashar al-Assad. His voice, however, has gone viral through the video of demonstrations in Hama and cannot be silenced. These moments when dictators like Mubarak, Gaddafi, El Abidine bin Ali are forced out of power are glorious for the demonstrators who bring them about. For us, of course, Filipinos, we are all nostalgic when we think about people power in 1986. But in every one of these places, the real extent of change beyond the removal of the leader is in question. In Egypt, the military-backed government recently raided local and international groups advocating human rights. In Tunisia now, the political momentum has moved to the capital. Many locals in Mohamed Bouazizi's village fear that their region is once again being sidelined. They've forgotten about us completely, one student said. There's not a single minister from Sidi Bouzid. With the initial euphoria that came when Ben Ali fled the country fast fading, the question is whether or not there will be any tangible political and economic gains for Sidi Bouzid in the new Tunisia. Protest songs on viral video, pictures of a burning man, a veiled, unarmed woman being stripped and stamped on by a group of armed policemen. Technology used well, has the ability to make you feel something. You may know something. When I say to you, people are being beaten on the streets by police on a newscast, you don't feel as much as you do when you see those images. It also gives you the ability to lean over the garden fence, to say, hey, can you believe this is happening? Even though the person that you're talking to may be thousands of miles away. It's not a toy or a hobby. It's a way of interfacing and talking to neighbors. If we do it badly, it threatens the lives of our colleagues in conflicts and other incidents, and can degrade our credibility and trust. This is the final line here is a quote from the poet of the Russian Revolution. Well, it's attributed to him, Mayakovsky, who said, art, which I would substitute by putting information, is not a mirror to be held up to society, but a hammer with which to shape it. The information that you're getting is often delivered with a purpose, with an agenda behind it. Consumers and users need to be aware of that. There are competing narratives that seek to shape society, and they're all competing for the narrative on social media now. I want to give you an example of something that I did. I tried to upload this video, but I couldn't. My technological skills apparently didn't go that far, and it didn't go viral, but it got me unofficially detained for several hours. I was in Myanmar, or Burma, a year after the cyclone Nargish swept through the region. While we were there, I do think fate intervened, because it was a village that was terribly remote. We had to take a UN helicopter to get there. But almost as soon as we arrived, a baby who cannot have been more than 3 months old died in our camera's lens. The people there, indication of how remote it was. The people there said, oh, we've never seen white people. I had an Australian and an Englishman with me as my producer and cameraman. We've only seen them on DVDs before. Burma is not that far away, but that's how kind of closed off this place was. And neglected, to be honest with you. The cameras that were rolling watched as I tried to resuscitate the baby. We did CPR maybe for 2 minutes, and in the end we stopped because my producer whispered to me, don't give them too much hope. Because what would we have done? What if the baby had recovered enough to get back and there was brain damage? This was a place with no sanitation, no running water, no electricity. It was decimated by the cyclone, and this is a year after, and people are still rebuilding their homes. I made some choices as a journalist about what to do. Definitely not show a moment of death. Definitely I chose not to show myself doing the resuscitation, which I think other media groups might have made a different choice. The story wasn't about me. The story was about the people in that village. And the piece was about 3 minutes long, and it was a survey. It was a panoramic view of the whole area. And I ended it by showing the baby being buried in a very unofficial way. I mean, it's the country. They dug a shallow grave, covered the baby's face, wrapped it in its swaddling clothes, and just dug some earth over it. The cameraman said that he was the most emotional out of everybody in the crowd, because the fact is that infant mortality is high in the country. It is not unusual for children to die there. Certainly much more unusual than it is much less unusual than it is here in the Philippines. Their rates are sub-Saharan type. Now, I put up there some questions. What choices would you have made if you were the mother and you were describing what had happened and you were putting it on Facebook? Her baby was called White Flower. This was a community that was being given water. They were being given a litre. What was it? No, it was something really bad, like 7 litres per week per head by the WFP. And it was 30 degrees. I think they just didn't know how to keep the baby alive. They didn't realize that it was being dehydrated, and they were wrapping it up because they were thinking it was getting cold and getting, I don't know, there was a lot of mucus. What would you have done if you were an activist? What would your story have been like if you were an activist? And what if you were a journalist? What even if you were a government official? I think what journalists bring to a story that social media or people don't do per se is bring balance, devotion to accuracy, and the determination to put the event in context. That is not the only baby that died in Burma that day, and I put that statistic in there. I put what the United Nations says is the infant mortality rate. What's going to be the impact on this, on the practice of journalism in the year to come? I'm willing to make some fearless predictions in the 3 minutes or so that I have left. First, we had tickers, then mobile alerts, social media streams. We may see integrated desks in the center of newsrooms to manage the flow of information across several platforms. Some correspondents are becoming 24-hour news brands on their own. I'm going to try and give this a go in the next year. I'll check back with you, or check back with me to see how I did. You'll see people curating the news so consumers don't have to. Skills that don't come naturally to big news organizations steeped in their own brand's journalism. Following phone hacking scandals, we may see more initiatives that make it possible for consumers to trace material back to the source for transparency purposes, as ProPublica in the US has done. It's done it so that you don't even have to leave the page. Interview transcripts, better data journalism, ethics statements, disclosure of conflicts of interests, I think will become more prevalent. The next few decades will see determined efforts towards and demands for radical transparency, triggering social, political, and even cultural transformations around the world. These transformations will be mediated by rapidly expanding social interconnectedness, facilitated not only through technology, and this is important, but by the desire by individuals and institutions to reach out across existing geographic, political, cultural, and sociological divides. These individuals and institutions will begin to coalesce in common interest clusters to challenge traditional organizations, political superstructures, social norms, consumer choices, long-held beliefs, and established patterns of behavior. This process of coalescing will increasingly compel decision makers to recognize, confront, and resolve critical trade-offs in the face of rapidly depleting resources, just to get an environmental angle in there. Simultaneously, there will be an intense demand for accountability where, for instance, having delivered is seen as more important than who donated. There will be a rising impatience with those who insist on erecting artificial boundaries that don't deliver, but there will be an affinity for those who create synergies across boundaries in order to deliver. Added to this would be the growing aspirations of hundreds of millions of people living in emerging economies like ours. Having gained economic self-confidence, citizens of these economies will make their voices heard politically on how we should collectively and sustainably engage with the world we live in and with its resources. The world is currently in the process of redesign. These years of recession, in a sense, have helped to push the world's reset button. Some of the transformations may already be underway, whether they're led by citizens from across the Middle East, acting to organize collectively on social media, or by villagers in rural India demanding accountability and empowerment by invoking freedom of information legislation, as indeed we are in the Philippines. The next decades will not be just about technology, but mostly, I believe, about attitude. That is, the desire on the part of these common interest clusters to empower themselves through technology or other available productive means to drive change in the world around them. And that means in the world around you. So it's over to you. Thank you very much.